Hi, my name is Edgar Lushaju, and I'm an artist and illustrator and YouTuber here on YouTube. And in today's video, I'm going to be turning this illustration into this painting. Let's jump right into it. So where do you start with something like this? If you're wondering what this is about, go ahead and have a look at my creative art ideas while painting TenHudred video by clicking the link that has just come up on the top right hand corner. And in that video, I talk about how I came up with this illustration and the different bits that make it up. But just for context, this is an illustration of TenHudred. He's an artist I follow here on YouTube, and as an artist myself, he has inspired me in a lot of ways, and that's partly why when I thought of the idea of this project, I decided to make him the subject, or at least the first subject. Go ahead and check him out on YouTube and on Instagram at TenHudred. Now back to coloring. This was a challenging but exciting project, and I learned a couple of things along the way that I thought I might share or might be helpful to anyone thinking of trying this out, especially while trying to emulate the TenHudred aesthetic in my own adaptation of who he is. Speaking of aesthetic, or look, as us mere mortals would say, TenHudred uses a lot of bright colors in his art, and after a bit of trial and error, I found it was much easier to paint in flat colors first, and later adjust the brightness and richness of the colors with adjustment layers and different layer modes in Photoshop. If you use Photoshop or a similar digital painting program, you will notice that the tools I used mostly here are the lasso tool to select different areas, the paintbrush tool to color those selected areas in, and the eyedropper tool to pick out certain colors, and I talk about this a little bit later on. One thing I would say though is if you're going to attempt a similar project, you might want to do some generalized color planning first. And what I mean by this is try and make a quick color test just to determine where you want what color to go. And after you're satisfied with the color choices, combination and placement on this rough painting layer, for lack of a better word, or this study, then you can go ahead and apply that to the overall image. I think this will save you a lot of time. Personally, I spent a lot of time coloring and recoloring different sections of this drawing as I went along. Something I think I could have avoided had I planned and organized my color placement beforehand. At this point, go ahead and pause the video right here if you can, and let me know in the comments how you set up or plan your digital or even traditional painting. I would love to know things that I could do differently, and I'm sure other people watching this would benefit from it as well. Second thing I would say is try and generate a color palette or color scheme before going into a coloring process. And what I mean here is to have a look at what colors you want to use and determine how compatible and harmonious they would look in relation to your intended result. I would even go further and say create a layer or color swatches, I'm sure there's a way to do that within Photoshop, that has as many tones and saturation variations as you think you might need. Again, this will save you time in the future, especially when you're doing a big project with repeating colors that are spread all over the canvas. With this project, for example, I had layered multiple attributes of TenHudred into one image, so getting the colors to work was at times tricky. Partly because I am attempting to further interpret TenHudred with color after interpreting him with my illustration. With this, there is at times a clash of styles and preferences when it comes to color and coloring choices and their application. Let's just say coloring one more time. Things like bold, sharp shadows versus gradient shadows, or a realistic versus stylized look, and so on. So with a predetermined palette or swatches, I feel this might make this process easier. So many fancy words there. A good example of this in this illustration that I talk about more clearly in my creative art ideas while drawing TenHudred video is how I incorporated some of his paintings into his jacket and hoodie. And these artworks already had their own color going, so figuring out how to make it all work harmoniously and still do justice to the TenHudred style, or whatever artist or art style you're trying to emulate, becomes another point of interest to think about before you begin. Personally, I did not do this palette thing when working on this project. And as a result, I had to constantly turn off layers and use the eyedropper tool to get the repeating color whenever I needed it. But if you say, in the words of Pete Rodriguez, don't let me stop you. I should mention at this point that these stylistic or aesthetic conditions were conditions that I set on myself in the execution of this project. And it's from these constraints that I've been able to learn and experience all these new things that I otherwise might have overlooked. Painting this illustration has also shown me that in terms of content of a painting or drawing, and perhaps other creative projects, depending on how much you put into it, how much research and meaning you engage into creating something, it can often give you so much more than just a beautiful image in the end. And these outcomes can be subjects of other things to think about, like what is art style? What does it mean to appropriate an artist style versus copy an artist style? Is the value of art in its final state, or is it in the process that led to it that accounts for that value, and so many more? And to further that line of thinking, how far then can art go? Does it just live on YouTube as a video? Does it go into other digital platforms? Does it get animated? Does it become merch? And in the cases where the art emulates another artist's style or aesthetic, what are the dynamics concerning copyrights and ownership? And how do you navigate that, if at all you intend to sell this art? And the list goes on. But in the end, we've arrived at the state of questioning and confusion of sorts because we decided to begin, to draw something at least, to make a video. And that's a good place to be. So in summary, for this image, first, I set up my line work illustration. Second, I then go and add a few extra details where needed. Third, before I color, I add a base tone background layer. Avoid using white if you can. And finally, I go ahead and do the flat coloring.
So there you have it. This is the final painting. I went ahead and added some shadows and highlights and textures just to make the image pop a bit more and adjust a few things so that it works. Overall, I think it might look a bit darker than TenHudred's pieces because they seem to be more brighter, and maybe that's something I can work on in my next video or in the future if I was able to do something else that's TenHudred-y themed. In case I forgot to say anything, it might just come on and voice over. What was the other thing I was gonna say? Yeah, thank you to my subscribers, my 70-something subscribers. I don't know how many there are right now. Thank you very much to all my subscribers. I love ya. And keep supporting the brother. No, I mean thank you to all my subscribers. And a special thank you to, shout out to Odin Godson, OG. Special shout out to Odin Godson. Shout out to Odin Godson. What am I doing?
A special shout out to Odin Godson for being subscriber of the month. You are gonna get, you get to watch this video over and over and over and over again.
By the way, this is not an effect, it's just my voice. See you guys on the next one. Bye.